when my mother remarried. I thought the hardest part would be getting used to a new house. The creak of different stairs, the strange way the light slipped through curtains that weren't mine, the way every object seemed to carry someone else's history. But it wasn't the walls or the furniture that unsettled me most. It was him, my new stepbrother. He wasn't unkind, not at all. If anything, he was a quiet type, polite in that absent-minded way that left me unsure whether he actually noticed me or was just going through motions. We were close in age. He a year older, maybe two. His presence filled the house in a way I couldn't ignore. He had this reserved calm about him, as if he carried his own weather system everywhere he went, one that didn't allow anyone in unless he wanted them there. At first, we circled each other the way strangers do who've been asked to pretend they're family. Meals at the dinner table became careful negotiations, passing plates without brushing hands, polite questions about classes, half smiles my mother was too eager to interpret as bonding. I gave short answers, and he didn't push. His father sat between us like a referee, laughing too loud at his own stories, and my mother's gaze bounced nervously back and forth, trying to measure our comfort. When dinner ended, I'd slip into the living room to scroll on my phone. He'd eventually drift in, wordless, grab the remote, and flip to whatever show he liked. We ended up in opposite corners of the couch more nights than I can count, not speaking, but not leaving either. The silence wasn't unfriendly. Exactly. Just charged. I'd catch myself noticing things I shouldn't. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the absent flick of his fingers as he brushed it back, the quiet rhythm of his laugh when something on screen amused him. I told myself it was only because he was new, unfamiliar. That's what my brain insisted even as my body betrayed me. Leaning forward when he did, turning my head too quickly when he spoke. He had a way of speaking softly, like words weren't meant for everyone, only for the person standing close enough to really listen. In the hallways, we brushed past each other. The house wasn't small, but somehow it felt smaller when we both moved through it. Our shoulders would nearly graze, and I pretended it didn't make my chest tighten. I'd mumble sorry when our arms touched, though he never seemed fazed. He'd just keep walking, hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, like my presence was ordinary. Ordinary. That was the word I tried to cling to, but it was hard to believe it when I noticed myself cataloging details. The slope of his shoulders under a t-shirt, the way he leaned against the kitchen counter, the sound of his voice when he said my name. I hated how aware I was, how restless it made me. Lying awake at night, I'd replay scraps of our day together, as if they meant more than they did. A glance, a laugh, the barest touch. It should have been easy to ignore. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't even particularly warm. He was just there, always there. And the more I told myself not to think about him, the more I did. One evening, the four of us were gathered in the living room, but eventually his father and my mother excused themselves, retreating upstairs with yawns and murmurs of good night. That left us alone, the TV flickering between us. He stretched his legs out, ankles crossed on the coffee table, and I tucked mine beneath me, hugging a pillow as if it would shield me from the odd tension that hovered in the air. We didn't talk. We rarely did in those moments. But the silence pressing on me until every small sound, the scrape of his nail against the remote, the soft hitch of his breath, felt louder than it should. When the credits rolled and the screen dimmed, he set the remote down beside him. A commercial started, bright and intrusive, and I reached for the remote without thinking. At the same time, so did he. Our hands met on the cushion, warm skin against warm skin. I froze. It wasn't even that remarkable, a brush of fingers, a half-second overlap of intent. But the shock that rushed through me was out of proportion, like my whole body had been waiting for it. He still, too, his hand not moving away immediately. The weight of his touch feather-light, but undeniable. For a heartbeat, neither of us pulled back. I felt the air thicken, a hum between us I couldn't explain, couldn't name, but couldn't deny either. My pulse tripped over itself, and my mouth went dry. In that small stillness, it felt like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting to see what we'd do. And then, slowly, he withdrew his hand, fingers curling back into his lap like nothing had happened. My own hand lingered on the cushion for a second too long before I grabbed the remote. fumbling with it just to have something to hold. The screen brightened again, flooding the room with empty sound. But I couldn't shake the ghost of his touch, seared into my skin, burning into the quiet between us. I pretended to focus on the TV, but all I could hear was the echo of silence, louder than anything else. And in that silence, I realized the space between us wasn't empty at all. It was alive, waiting. The weekend trip wasn't my idea. My mother insisted we all go together. Her, my stepfather, me, and him, to a small cabin near the lake that belonged to one of her friends. It'll be good for us, she'd said with that hopeful smile of hers, like family could be built the way you stack firewood, piece by piece, until eventually it looked like something solid. The cabin had just enough space for the parents to take one bedroom and leave us the other. A single room with twin beds pushed so close together that a narrow strip of wood floor was the only thing pretending to separate them. He dropped his duffel bag on the mattress nearest the window without hesitation. I set mine on the other, trying not to think about how close we'd be all weekend. When I turned, he was already pulling off his hoodie, and underneath he wore nothing but a white t-shirt that clung to him in the heat. It should have been ordinary. People undress in front of each other all the time, but I caught myself looking too long, watching the movement of his shoulders, the easy way he stretched his arms. I tore my gaze away, busying myself with unpacking. My pulse was unsteady, and I hated myself for it. Dinner was uneventful, filled with laughter from our parents and the clatter of cutlery, but the awareness between us was sharper than the scrape of knives against plates. When the evening wound down, we found ourselves back in that cramped room, the door closed behind us, silence spreading like smoke. He peeled off his shirt without hesitation, tossing it onto the chair in the corner. I froze. His bare skin caught the soft glow of the bedside lamp, muscles shifting under it, as if even his smallest movements demanded attention. I turned away too quickly, pretending to scroll through my phone, but every sense felt heightened. The smell of his shampoo, the warmth radiating from his bed a few feet away. "Long day," he muttered, sinking down onto his mattress. Yeah, I managed, though my throat was dry. It should have ended there, both of us retreating under covers and pretending nothing was strange. But instead, he chuckled, low, quiet, almost to himself. "What?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Nothing," he said, still smiling faintly. "You just look so tense, like you're afraid the walls are going to close in on you." I laughed, but it came out nervous. "It's just small in here." "Yeah," he said, leaning back on his elbows. "Guess we'll have to get used to it." The words landed heavier than they should have, as if he wasn't talking about the room at all. My stomach twisted, though I forced a smile. We both climbed into bed eventually, lamps off, the quiet of the cabin pressing against the walls. But I couldn't sleep. Every shift he made in the mattress beside mine seemed louder in the dark, the creak of springs, the soft sigh when he exhaled. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing at nothing but his breathing. Why him? I asked myself again and again. Why this? He wasn't supposed to be the person who made me feel this restless, this unsteady. He was supposed to be just my stepbrother. Nothing more. And yet, in the silence, I couldn't stop listening. Couldn't stop imagining the space between our beds shrinking until there was none at all. "Can't sleep?" His voice startled me in the dark. I swallowed. "Not really." "Me neither." A pause. "It's too quiet here." I almost laughed. "You're complaining about quiet?" "Guess I've gotten used to noise," he said softly, and something in his tone made me turn my head toward him, even though I couldn't see his face. The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning I couldn't name. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but I didn't. Instead, silence returned, thicker than before. Minutes stretched. I closed my eyes, trying to stay my breath, but then I felt it, the shift of his weight, the faint rustle of sheets. He had rolled, and from the sound of it, he was facing me now. I froze. Every nerve in my body lit up at once, as if I could feel his gaze on me even in the dark. I stayed still, willing myself to breathe evenly, but it was impossible. The air between us hummed, charged with everything we weren't saying. I didn't dare open my eyes. I just lay there, listening to his breathing, steady, calm, a rhythm I both dreaded and craved. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it grew closer. His bed creaked again, a shift toward me. The narrow strip of floor between us suddenly felt meaningless, like an illusion we'd both stopped believing in. I kept my eyes shut, my hands curled tight in the sheets, heart pounding against my ribs. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. But his nearness was undeniable, a gravity pulling me toward him no matter how much I tried to resist. In the dark, with only his breathing to measure the seconds, I realized I was no longer afraid of the quiet. I was afraid of what it meant to want it filled. With him, and before sleep finally claimed me, the last thing I felt was the heat of his presence, closer than it had ever been, and the terrifying, exhilarating thought that maybe he wanted this too. The lake trip blurred by moments, meals cooked too quickly, walks where we all pretended things were normal, card games that dissolved into laughter. But through it all, I felt his presence like a weight just behind me, shaping the air I breathed. It wasn't what he said. He rarely said much. It was the silences, the glances, the quiet ways he seemed to notice me even when no one else did. It happened on the last morning, when we were packing up the cabin. My mother and stepfather were busy loading the car, leaving the two of us inside to gather what was left. I stuffed clothes into my bag carelessly, wanting to be done. When I bent to zip it closed, I felt his eyes on me. "You missed a button," he said quietly. I looked down. My shirt was crooked. One button slipped into the wrong hole, so the fabric puckered unevenly. "Oh!" I muttered, fumbling to fix it. My fingers felt clumsy, and I tugged too hard, missing the loop again. "Here." Before I could respond, he was in front of me. His hand brushed mine aside, his fingers steady where mine were shaking. He unfastened the button and slid it back through with ease. His head tilted slightly, his brow furrowed in concentration. The moment stretched. I could feel the warmth of his body close to mine, smell the faint trace of his cologne. My chest rose and fell too quickly, and when I dared to look up, his eyes met mine. And then everything stopped. Time seemed to thicken, as though the world outside the cabin had frozen mid-breath. His hand lingered near my chest, his knuckles brushing lightly against the fabric. Neither of us moved. His eyes searched mine, steady and unguarded, and I felt the truth strike me like a bolt. I wanted this. I wanted him. The realization left me breathless. I should have laughed, made a joke, stepped back. But my feet felt nailed to the floor, my pulse thundered in my ears, and I swore I could hear his too. His lips parted slightly, like he might say something, but no words came. The silence between us was alive, trembling with everything we weren't saying. Then, almost imperceptibly, his hand brushed higher, not quite intentional, not quite an accident. His fingertips grazed the edge of my collar, smoothing it flat as though that had been his only purpose. But it was more. I felt it, the careful slowness of his touch, the way his eyes didn't leave mine, the quiet he filled the room with. I couldn't breathe. Finally, he stepped back, his hand falling away. "There," he said, his voice soft, rougher than usual. I nodded quickly, unable to form words. My throat was tight, and my skin still burned where he'd touched me. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. Zippers, bags, footsteps, doors closing. But it was like I was moving through water, too heavy, too slow. Every time I glanced at him, he was already looking away, his expression unreadable. On the drive back, I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, replaying it again and again, the brush of his fingers, the heat of his eyes. My mother's cheerful chatter blurred into background noise. I couldn't hear anything except the echo of silence from that moment, the one that felt like it had changed everything. That night, back home, I lay in bed wide awake. My room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I could still feel his nearness, the weight of his gaze like a hand pressing against my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way his fingers had lingered on my collar, the slow care of his movements. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing, that he was just being helpful, that I was reading too much into a simple gesture. But deep down, I knew better. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. It hadn't been ordinary. It was a moment that froze me, the moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Something had shifted, quiet but irreversible, and now the silence between us wasn't just silence. It was a question neither of us had the courage to answer. I turned on my side, buried my face in the pillow, restless and unsettled. Sleep wouldn't come. All I could think about was him, his eyes, his hand, the charged stillness of the cabin, and the terrifying, undeniable truth. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I don't know how long we'd been circling each other, orbiting around an invisible gravity neither of us wanted to name. By now, every silence between us carried its own weight. Every accidental touch felt too deliberate. Every glance that lingered just a second too long set off alarms in my chest. And still we said nothing. Until that night. It wasn't anything dramatic. No thunderstorm raging outside. No power outage. No drunken slip of words. Just the two of us, alone in the dim living room. The house was quiet. Everyone else gone for the weekend. He was on the couch, sprawled out like he owned the world, flipping absently through his phone. I sat cross-legged on the floor, pretending to care about some half-watched show on the TV. But my attention was elsewhere, on the soft sound of his breathing, on the way his shirt clung just a little when he stretched, on how close we were without actually touching. I hated myself for noticing, and I couldn't stop. He broke the silence first. "You're awfully quiet tonight." I forced a shrug, eyes glued to the screen. "Just tired, I guess." He chuckled under his breath, the kind of low sound that vibrated through me far more than it should have. "You're always tired. Or maybe you're just avoiding talking to me." That made me look up. His expression was casual, but his eyes, God, his eyes weren't. They held something unreadable, something that made my stomach knot. "I'm not avoiding you," I said, though my voice was too soft to sound convincing. He tilted his head, studying me, as though weighing whether or not to push further. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "Sometimes it feels like you are." The air shifted. My chest tightened. I swallowed, throat dry. "And what if I am?" He blinked, surprised by my honesty. For a moment, I thought he'd laugh it off, make some sarcastic comment to cut the tension. But he didn't. He just stared at me, something raw flickering across his face. And then he sat up. The casual sprawl was gone. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his whole body angled toward me. The space between us felt charged, alive. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My pulse quickened. "Depends on what it is." He hesitated. I could see the battle in his eyes, the fear, the longing, the restraint that was crumbling. His voice was barely a whisper when it finally came out. "Have you ever thought about us?" The world tilted. I froze, every thought scattering like glass hitting the floor. Us. 2 letters. Infinite weight. I should have laughed, should have brushed it off with some joke. But my mouth wouldn't work, because I'd thought about it more times than I could ever admit. My voice cracked, and I tried again. "Why would you ask me that?" His eyes dropped his hands, fingers knotting together. "Because I can't stop thinking about it. And I don't know what's worse, saying out loud or keeping inside forever." The room was too quiet. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the quick, uneven rhythm of my breathing. I whispered, "You're not serious." His gaze lifted, locking onto mine. No smile, no smirk, no shield of humor. Just raw, trembling honesty. I've never been more serious. Something in me cracked open. Every instinct screamed run, but my body betrayed me. I leaned closer. My hand twitched, almost reaching for him before I pulled it back. My skin felt too tight, like I didn't fit inside myself anymore. "What if you're wrong?" I asked, voice shaking. "What if this ruins everything?" His jaw tightened. "And what if it doesn't? What if it's the only thing that's ever made sense?" We stared at each other, the air between us alive with words unsaid. I could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else. Hope. And God help me. I wanted to reach for it. The moment stretched until I thought I'd shatter under the weight of it. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he shifted off the couch, sitting on the floor beside me. Our knees brushed, a whisper of contact that felt like fire. I couldn't breathe. His hand hovered, trembling, before resting lightly on mine. Just his fingers, just the barest touch. My whole body lit up like a live wire. "Tell me to stop," he said, voice breaking. I should have. I knew I should have. But instead, the words that slipped out were, "Don't." His breath caught. His thumb brushed against my knuckles, tentative, reverent. He was looking at me like I was something fragile, something holy. And then, as if afraid the world might end, he leaned in. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. No hunger, no desperation, just slow, trembling closeness. His lips barely touched mine, a question instead of demand. My chest ached with the gentleness of it. I melted. For a moment, time stopped. There was no past, no future, just a fragile present, suspended between breaths. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, both of us shaking, both of us terrified. "I didn't know," I whispered, voice breaking. I didn't know how badly I wanted this until now. His fingers laced with mine, tentative but sure. "Then don't let go." We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there, hand in hand, hearts pounding in unison. The TV flickered in the background, forgotten. The world outside could have burned down, and I wouldn't have noticed. Later, when we finally lay down, too close, too careful, afraid that even moving would break the spell, I listened to his breathing beside me. Every inhale, every exhale, steady and real. I closed my eyes, knowing with absolute certainty nothing would ever be the same again. Morning came slow, soft light spilling to the blinds and painting the room in pale gold. I woke to the sound of his breathing beside me, steady and calm. For a moment, I forgot everything, that we weren't supposed to be here, that last night had crossed a line neither of us could take back. Then it all came rushing back. The kiss, the trembling of his hand when it found mine, the way my chest had cracked open like a door I'd been holding shut for years. I didn't move, afraid to break the fragile quiet, afraid that if I shifted even an inch, I'd find it had all been a dream. When he stirred, his shoulder brushed mine, a small, ordinary touch, but made my breath catch. "Morning," he mumbled, voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back. We didn't say anything else for a while. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, caught between wanting to run and wanting to never move again. It was him who finally broke the silence, with a crooked half-smile. "You know, you hauled the blanket in your sleep." I turned my head toward him, pretending to be offended. "Do not." "Do too," he teased, tugging lightly at the edge of the blanket between us. I woke up freezing. Something in me loosened. I laughed, quiet but real, and he grinned at the sound like he'd been waiting for it. The tension thin, not gone, but softer, like a storm finally moving off the horizon. Later, in the kitchen, we moved around each other like we'd been doing it forever, passing plates, reaching over shoulders, laughing when we both went for the same mug at once. "Guess you're stealing everything today," he said, bumping me with his hip. I rolled my eyes, but my heart wasn't in the act. "Maybe you're just slow." He smirked, leaning closer. "Or maybe you like having an excuse to touch me." The words landed heavier than his tone suggested, but neither of us pulled away. Instead, I shoved his shoulder lightly, pretending not to notice how warm his skin felt even to the fabric of his shirt. After breakfast, we ended up back on the couch, an old blanket draped over both of us. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through playlists, and then, without asking, handed me one earbud. "Here," he said simply. I took it, sliding into my ear. Our shoulders touched, our knees pressed close beneath the blanket, and suddenly a quiet song filled the space between us. Ordinary, mundane, yet my heart raced like we were on the edge of something impossible. We didn't speak, just listened together, the music weaving a silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. I caught myself watching him out of the corner of my eye, how his lashes caught the light, how his mouth curved slightly with the rhythm. When he noticed me looking, he didn't call me out. He just met my gaze for a second, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us, before turning back to the screen. That look said more than either of us dared to. The days slipped by like that, soft edges and small moments. He teased me about how I cut vegetables. I teased him about how he hummed off-key when he thought I wasn't listening. We laughed more than we should have, and every laugh made me forget the weight pressing on us. For once, it didn't feel wrong. It felt easy. By evening, I was drowsy, the warmth of the blanket and the low hum of music pulling me under. My head drifted against his shoulder, and I froze, waiting for him to shift away. He didn't. Instead, I felt his breath hitch, then his arm shift, tentative, careful, before resting around me. Not tight, not possessive. Just there, a quiet anchor. My chest ached with how natural it felt. I don't remember falling asleep. Just a steady beat of his heart under my cheek, the warmth of his body against mine, the sense that, for the first time, we weren't running from whatever this was. No words, no promises, no labels. Just silence. Just closeness. Just us. And in that moment, that was enough. The morning light seemed different that day. Brighter somehow. Though it was the same sun that had risen every other morning since I'd moved into this house. It poured across the kitchen in long golden streaks, catching on the rim of the coffee mugs, slipping across the wood of the table. I came down late, still half in that daze between sleep and waking, and found him already there. His hair was damp from a quick shower, his shoulders slouched in that effortless way that always seemed to draw my eyes. He didn't look up immediately, but when he did, when his gaze caught mine across the room, something passed between us. Quiet, certain, unmistakable. He slid a mug toward me without a word, steam curling between us. But there was something in the gesture, in the curve of his mouth as he handed it over, that said more than words could. My fingers brushed his as I took it, and he didn't move away right away. "Morning," he said, voice low, barely a whisper meant only for me. I swallowed against the sudden tightness in my chest. Morning. To anyone else, it would have sounded like nothing, but to me it was everything. Family chatter soon filled the kitchen. My mother fussing over breakfast, his father thumbing through the newspaper, clinking dishes and scraping chairs across tile. The noise should have scattered whatever fragile thing had begun between us. But it didn't. If anything, it made it stronger. We sat across from each other, pretending at normalcy. He reached for the butter at the same time I did, and our hands collided. He gave the smallest smile, and I had to look down quickly, afraid of how obvious I must have looked. Under the table, my knee brushed his. I didn't move. Neither did he. It was strange, moving through the day with his secret threaded quietly between us. In the living room, when our mothers talked about weekend plans, he caught my eye over the back of the couch. The glance lasted only a second, but my pulse jumped like it had been a lifetime. Later, when he passed me in the hallway, his hand grazed mine, a fleeting contact, gone almost before it began, but it left my skin buzzing. I wondered if anyone noticed, if the air between us hummed loud enough for others to hear. But no one said a word, and maybe that was what made it so intoxicating, that what had shifted inside us was invisible to everyone else. Ours alone, that evening, when the house had quieted and dinner plates were stacked in the sink, we found ourselves back at the table, opposite sides again. My stepfather had excused himself with a muttered good night. My mother lingering in the living room with the TV humming low. It left just us, the silence stretching long and full. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me, not shying away this time. "You've been quiet," he murmured. "So have you." A small smile ghosted across his face. Guess we're both still figuring it out. I didn't answer, but the truth of his words sank deep. We were both walking blind into something we couldn't name, and yet neither of us wanted to turn back. The lamp over the dining table cast a soft circle of light. His hand slid across the wood, slow, deliberate. My breath caught as it reached mine. For a second, I froze. Every reason not to do this pressed against my ribs. But then his fingers curled, brushing mine gently, and the world fell away. I let my hand rest in his, hidden beneath the table where no one could see. The warmth of his palm spread to me like fire, like truth, like something I had been missing for longer than I'd realized. I met his eyes, and he held my gaze without wavering. No words passed between us. None needed. The silence said enough. Later, lying awake in my room, I thought about how quietly everything had changed. There hadn't been a single moment of thunder, no grand declarations, No scene out of movie. Just glances, touches, whispers that meant more than entire conversations. And yet the ground beneath me was no longer the same. What was waiting ahead, I didn't know. But I knew this. Something real had begun. Something fragile, terrifying, beautiful. And as I thought of his hand, finding mine beneath the table, I finally understood. The space between us was never empty. It was waiting.